The notification glowed on my phone at 3:17 a.m., a harsh slash of light in the darkness of my Raleigh penthouse. I'd been awake for hours, tweaking the fall menu in my mind, a nervous energy that my boyfriend Cole had started to complain about. My eyes burned as I stared at the headline from North Carolina Monthly's food critic, my brain refusing to process the words. First look, Amaranth, a revolutionary dining experience, launches in East Raleigh. With a trembling finger, I tapped the link. There it was, my concept, my recipes, my revolutionary approach to Afro-diasporic fusion cuisine, all of it presented under someone else's name, under Chantel's name. The article was a cascade of praise, a breathtaking culinary vision, unprecedented flavor pairings. Chef Chantel Dubois is a genius. It even described the signature dish I had spent the last year perfecting, a guinea hen confit with a tamarind sorghum glaze, served on a bed of fonio grain. My dish, my story on a plate. 7 years of my life. 7 years of missed school plays, forgotten birthdays, and promises to my 15-year-old daughter Sabrina that mommy just needs to perfect this one sauce. All of it stolen by the woman I had mentored, championed, and trusted with my culinary Bible, the worn Moleskine notebook that held every secret I'd ever learned in a kitchen. The Raleigh skyline glittered through my floor-to-ceiling windows, the lights of downtown a glittering tapestry. I'd insisted on this view when I moved here after my divorce, a constant reminder of what I was building. Now it felt like those lights were mocking me. I called Chantel immediately, straight to voicemail, of course. Chantel, this is Latisha. I just saw the review. We need to talk, now. My voice was eerily calm, a thin sheet of ice over the fury raging beneath. My carefully constructed world was cracking at the seams. The phone slipped from my hands, clattering to the marble floor. I thought about calling my mother, but I could already hear her voice. Baby, maybe this is God's way of telling you to slow down. Mom had been saying things like that for years, ever since I'd stopped going to church after my divorce. Ever since I'd decided that if God existed, he clearly had favorites, and I wasn't one of them. My phone began to buzz incessantly. Texts from other chefs, emails from my investors, the executive team for my restaurant group, scheduling an emergency meeting for 7 a.m. Cole stirred beside me, his dark hair tousled against the Egyptian cotton pillowcase. Everything okay, babe? He murmured, not opening his eyes. We'd been dating for 8 months, and he still looked like he belonged on a magazine cover, even half asleep. It was 3:42 a.m. Cole, a successful restaurant investor himself, would want to soothe me with expensive dinners and weekend getaways, but he wouldn't grasp the depth of this betrayal. To him, restaurants were assets, concepts were brands, and chefs were replaceable. He didn't understand that in my world, this wasn't business, it was the theft of one's soul. Just work, I whispered, already calculating my next moves. Go back to sleep. By 6:30 a.m., I'd showered and dressed in my sharpest chef's coat and tailored pants, my own form of armor. I was heading downtown to meet with the partners of our restaurant group, the one I'd helped build from a single bistro into Raleigh's most celebrated culinary empire. I left Cole a note but didn't wake him. What would I say? That I'd been outplayed by the young woman I'd treated like a daughter? That the third Michelin star I'd been pursuing for 3 years, the star that would have made me one of the only black women in the world to hold that honor, was now impossible? The emergency meeting was worse than I'd imagined. Our lead investor, Marvin Jones, looked at me with an expression somewhere between pity and suspicion. The conference room felt like a tribunal, with me as the accused. Latisha, how could this happen? Her menu is identical to the proposal for Ethel you presented last month. It's not identical, I said, my voice tight. It's mine. She stole my book. She copied everything. Techniques my grandmother taught me. Spice combinations I spent years perfecting. Plating styles that tell the story of my heritage. The legal team exchanged glances. We need to determine what is proprietary, one of them said. Recipes are notoriously difficult to protect. The optics here are complicated. Complicated? I almost laughed. I brought her into my kitchen. I taught her my grandmother's spice blends. I shared stories my family has passed down for generations. I trusted her with my entire culinary philosophy. The board wants you to step back from service at your current restaurant, Jubilee, Marvin said, his voice flat, until we sort this out. Step back. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd never step back from anything. Not when I fought for custody of Sabrina. Not when I clawed my way up from line cook to executive chef in kitchens run by screaming men. Not when I rebuilt my life from scratch at 35. For how long? I asked. Marvin's silence was answer enough. As I walked to my car, my phone rang. Sabrina's name flashed on the screen. Mom, I saw the article online. Are you okay? My daughter's voice, so full of concern, almost broke me. I'm fine, baby. Just some workplace drama. Mom, I've been praying for you. Praying. The word hung between us like an uncomfortable truth. My 15-year-old daughter had found faith at her private school, something that both impressed and irritated me. How could she believe in a God who let people steal from their mothers? Thanks, sweetheart, I said, not knowing what else to say. Maybe you should talk to Pastor Clock. He's really wise about this kind of stuff. I'll think about it, I lied. I spent the day in meetings that felt like interrogations. By evening, I was emotionally gutted. I drove to Cole's River Oaks condo, needing the comfort of his easy confidence that everything would work out. You're overthinking this, Cole said as we sat on his balcony, overlooking the Raleigh skyline. He poured a glass of wine that cost more than my first set of knives. His hand rested on my thigh, warm but disconnected. So she stole your menu. You're Latisha Fuller. You'll create something better. You always do. It's not just a menu, Cole. It's my legacy, my reputation, my future. She took recipes that have been in my family for generations, and she's getting praised for them as if they're her brilliant innovations. He shrugged, that casual gesture that usually charmed me but now felt profoundly dismissive. Babe, you make great money. We make great money. Why don't we just take that trip to Athens we've been talking about? Let the lawyers handle this mess. I stared at him, suddenly seeing the man I'd been dating with startling clarity. Cole was handsome, successful, and completely unable to understand why someone would care more about creative integrity than a bottom line. Our relationship was built on mutual attraction and shared lifestyle preferences, but we'd never connected on anything deeper. I can't just run away to Greece, Cole. I have Sabrina to consider. This affects her college fund, her future. Sabrina's almost in college. She'll be fine. Besides, kids are resilient. The casual dismissal of my daughter was the final straw. I think I should go home tonight. Cole's face tightened. Fine, but you're being dramatic, Latisha. This isn't attractive anymore. Driving home, his words echoed in my ears. Obsessive, dramatic, not attractive. Maybe I had lost perspective. But as I thought about Chantel plating my food, telling my stories, and accepting praise for flavors born from my history, I knew I couldn't let it go. When I got home, I found a text from my mother, praying for you, baby. Remember, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. I stared at the Bible verse, feeling a familiar irritation. Mom always had a scripture for everything, but tonight, instead of deleting it, I found myself reading it again. Trust in the Lord, lean not on your own understanding. The next morning brought a flood of media requests and a lawsuit threat from Chantel's new investors. I ignored both and drove to Jubilee, my restaurant, to clean out my office. The lunch prep was in full swing, and seeing my kitchen running without me felt like watching strangers live in my house. Chantel had joined my kitchen a year earlier. She was brilliant, hungry, and reminded me of myself at 25. I took her under my wing immediately, sharing not just techniques but the stories behind the food. Anyone can follow a recipe, I told her during one of our late-night sessions after service. But a real chef understands the why this spice tells the story of the trade winds, why that braising method honors our ancestors. That's what makes it cuisine, not just food. She absorbed everything. She studied my plating, asked thoughtful questions about flavor balancing, and gradually earned my trust. By March, I'd let her study my culinary Bible, the repository of my life's work. It was my moonshot project, the recipes and philosophy for Ethel, a restaurant that would redefine fine dining. This is incredible, chef, she'd said, her eyes wide as she studied a diagram for a deconstructed gumbo. I've never seen anything like it. The way you connect flavors to history, to memory, it's like poetry on a plate. I was flattered, I didn't know she was also keeping her own notebook, photographing pages from mine, and meticulously documenting my process. She was building a parallel version of my dream, one that, to an outsider, would look completely original. The breakthrough came in June. After months of trial and error, I finally perfected the central technique for Ethel, a method of dry aging and slow roasting that infused meat with unbelievable flavor while maintaining perfect tenderness. It was my masterpiece, a technique that would revolutionize how high-end restaurants approach protein preparation. I was so excited I shared it with Chantel immediately, walking her through every step, explaining the science behind the process, even showing her the specific timing and temperature variations that made it work. "This is going to change everything," I told her, my hands moving as I demonstrated the technique. "This will be our signature at Athil, our calling card." Her eyes lit up with what I thought was excitement for us, for our team. "When do you think we'll present this to the investors?" she'd asked. "I want to run more tests," I said. "Perfect the execution. Maybe in next month or 6 weeks. It has to be perfect, no mistakes." 6 weeks, more than enough time for someone with my entire playbook to steal the game. Now, sitting in my empty office, I realized how naive I'd been, how trusting. My mother would say I'd been innocent as a dove, but forgotten to be wise as a serpent. Another Bible verse from my childhood that suddenly felt relevant. The investigation revealed the full extent of her deception. The investors' lawyers were blunt. "Proving ownership of a culinary concept is nearly impossible," they said. "The partners are offering a generous severance package. In exchange, you resign quietly and sign a non-compete." Generous severance, quiet resignation, the professional equivalent of being paid to disappear. I thought about my grandmother, who had sold plates of food from her porch to put my mother through college. What would she think of her granddaughter being bought off by the people who had stolen her family's recipes? That evening, I called Sabrina, who was at her father's house for the week. "Mom, what's happening? Dad saw the news." I closed my eyes. "It's bad, sweetheart. Really bad. Are you going to lose the restaurant?" "I might lose everything." There was a pause. "Mom, do you remember what you used to tell me when I was little, when I was scared of thunderstorms?" I smiled despite everything. "That storms pass, but the sun always comes back. Maybe this is your storm, Mom. Maybe the sun is coming." After we hung up, I sat alone in my silent penthouse, staring at my reflection in the dark windows. Latisha Fuller, 43, executive chef, master of the culinary universe. Except I wasn't. Stripped of my professional identity. Who was I? Cole had stopped calling after our fight. My colleagues in the food world were already distancing themselves, afraid that association with me would taint their own reputations. Even my assistant had asked to transfer to another restaurant in the group. The silence was deafening. For the first time in my adult life, I had nowhere to run, nothing to control, no kitchen to command. "God," I whispered into the empty room, surprised by the word. I hadn't spoken it with any meaning in years. "I don't know what I'm doing. I built my whole life on being the best, the one with the perfect palate, the one who could create magic with food. But I can't fix this. I've been so proud," I continued, the words tumbling out, "so convinced I could control everything through hard work and talent. But someone outsmarted me, and now I don't know who I am if I'm not the brilliant chef, the successful one, the one everyone respects." My voice broke. The identity I'd so carefully plated was a mess on the floor. "Help me," I whispered. "I don't know how to be anyone else." Driving away from Jubilee for the last time, I felt something unexpected, relief. The simple absence of the constant pressure to perform, to innovate, to be the best. A few days later, my mother called. "Latisha, honey, Pastor Clock from St. Catherine's wanted me to invite you to a support group he runs. It's just people navigating life changes." "Mom, I'm not ready for church." "It's not church, baby. It's just people. Hurting people, helping other hurting people." That Thursday, I found myself sitting in a church basement with 8 strangers, a divorced teacher, a laid-off engineer, a widow whose husband died in a car accident, a veteran struggling with PTSD, a single mother whose teenage son was addicted to drugs, people whose problems couldn't be solved with a perfect sauce or a James Beard award. I'm Latisha, I said when it was my turn. I just lost my career to someone I trusted, and I'm trying to figure out who I am when I'm not wearing a chef's coat. They listened without judgment. For 2 hours, I wasn't successful or unsuccessful. I was just human. Pastor Clock, a gentle man in his 50s with kind eyes and calloused hands, spoke about how sometimes after we lose everything we think defines us is a perfect time to discover who we really are. Jesus said, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." He said, "Sometimes God allows the stripping away of everything we're holding on to so we can hold on to Him." I bristled at the suggestion that God possibly orchestrated my downfall, but something in Pastor Clock's voice, a weariness that spoke of his own losses, kept me listening. Over the next few weeks, I established new routines. Morning walks along Lake Lynn instead of pre-dawn kitchen prep. Lunches with my mother instead of working through meals. Talking on the phone with Sabrina for hours, uninterrupted by the frantic energy of the kitchen. For the first time in years, I wasn't creating, I wasn't performing, I was just being, and I liked it. Slowly, quietly, I began to hear something I'd been too busy to notice before. 3 months after my resignation, I got a call from an unexpected source, Alfred Macy, the food critic who had written the glowing review of Amaranth. "Miss Fuller, I need to speak with you about Chantal Dubois." We met at a small cafe downtown, away from the food scene. Alfred looked uncomfortable, fidgeting with his coffee cup. "I've been investigating some inconsistencies in my review," he said. "After the article published, I received several tips from people in the industry questioning the originality of the concept." My heart began to race. What kind of inconsistencies? When I interviewed Chef Dubois, she couldn't explain the cultural significance behind several dishes. She gave vague answers about flavor profiles that, frankly, sounded rehearsed. And when I asked her to demonstrate the dry aging technique that's supposedly her signature innovation, she made fundamental errors that any chef who developed the method would never make. I sat back in my chair. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I think I was part of perpetrating a fraud." He ran a hand through his hair. "And I want to make it right." Alfred had done his homework. He'd spoken to former colleagues, tracked down vendors who confirmed that Chantal had been ordering specific ingredients only after studying with me, and even found a photographer who had pictures of my notebook from a kitchen tour. "There's more," Alfred said. "Chantal's investors are already pulling out. The restaurant is hemorrhaging money. Her kitchen staff is in revolt because she can't replicate the techniques consistently. The whole thing is falling apart." Part of me felt vindicated, but another part, a part that surprised me, felt sad for the young woman who had been so hungry for success that she'd stolen someone else's dream. "What do you plan to do?" I asked. "I want to write a follow-up article, set the record straight, give credit where credit is due." I thought about it for a long moment. The old Latisha would have said yes immediately, would have demanded justice and public vindication. But something had changed in me during those weeks of walking and thinking and slowly learning to be still. "Before you do anything," I said, "I need to talk to Chantal." Alfred had given me enough evidence to destroy her completely, but I wanted to hear what she had to say before I decided how to proceed. We met at a small park near the lake, away from restaurants and kitchens and the world we'd both inhabited. She looked terrible. Thin, exhausted, the hollow-eyed ghost of the vibrant young chef I once knew. This was the face of someone who had stolen not just from me, but from investors who had trusted her with millions. Pity bubbled beneath the surface as I waited for her to explain why she stabbed me in the back. I still had a hard time wrapping my head around it. "They know," she said without preamble. "The investors. There are flavor notes in the dishes I can't explain, techniques I can't reproduce consistently. They know I couldn't have come up with it on my own. Are you surprised?" I needed her to acknowledge how she wronged me. It was personal. "I'll lose my job, everything." "How'd you get that?" She broke off and looked at me as my heart broke. She wasn't sorry about anything. "You'll lose your job?" I asked, wondering if she realized the irony, since I'd lost mine. She nodded. "I think so." "Good," I said simply. She looked startled by my bluntness. "Latisha, You stole from me," I interrupted. "You took recipes that belonged to my family, techniques I spent years perfecting. And you built a business on lies. Your investors are out hundreds of thousands of dollars because of your fraud. Chantel's composure cracked. I know what I did was wrong, but you have to understand. I've dreamed of having my own restaurant since I was a child. I wanted to make my family proud, to prove I could be somebody important. When I saw your concept, I thought if I could just stop. Heartbreaking. My voice was steady but firm. Don't make this about noble dreams. You wanted what I had, so you took it. That's theft, plain and simple. She began to cry. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for everything to go down like this. It seemed right at the time, but I'm sorry. You're sorry because you got caught, I said. If your restaurant had succeeded, would you be here confessing, or would you still be accepting praise for my work? The silence that followed was answer enough. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to return every penny you can to your investors. You're going to publicly admit what you did, not because you want redemption, but because it's the right thing to do, and you're going to face whatever legal consequences come from your fraud. Her eyes widened. But my career. Should have thought about that before you decided to steal someone else's. I snapped, angry at her entitlement crap. Chantel looked desperate. What about forgiveness? You're a Christian, right? Aren't you supposed to forgive? I studied her face, seeing someone who thought forgiveness meant avoiding consequences. I do forgive you, Chantel, but that's between me and God. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending you didn't commit a crime. It doesn't mean protecting you from the results of your choices. She glared at me. That's not true. Jesus forgave the thief on the cross, I said, trying to reach her, but the thief still died for his crimes. Forgiveness covers the debt between us, but it doesn't erase earthly consequences. You hurt a lot of people, and they deserve justice. As I walked away, I felt peace. Not the peace of revenge, but the peace of knowing that mercy and justice could coexist. I could forgive Chantel while still demanding accountability. Lord, save me from people who think they know how Christians should act, I muttered. Marvin called me the next morning, his voice strained. Latisha, we need to talk, immediately. 3 hours later, I met him at his office, where the entire board was assembled. They looked haggard, desperate. The confident investors who had pushed me out now wore the expressions of men watching their empire crumble. The Amaranth situation is a complete disaster, Marvin began. Our due diligence failed. We invested $1 million based on stolen concepts. The legal exposure is enormous. I know, I said calmly. The restaurant is hemorrhaging money. Her kitchen staff is in revolt. Food critics are asking questions. We need someone who can take control immediately and salvage what's left. And, I arched a brow. Marvin looked uncomfortable. We want you to take over operations. All of them. Full authority over the entire restaurant group. I leaned back in my chair. The same board who questioned my integrity 3 months ago now wants me to save them from their own poor judgment? Latisha, we made a mistake. You made a choice, I corrected. You chose to believe a thief over the chef who helped build this company. You chose to side with someone you barely knew over someone who had given you 7 years of excellence. The room was silent. Here are my terms, I continued. Non-negotiable. First, I want a controlling stake in the company. 51%. I'm not doing this again as an employee who can be pushed out when convenient. Marvin's eyes widened. That's fair. Second, I choose my own team. The management that abandoned me when I needed support is gone. I'll hire people who understand integrity. Latisha, Marvin squeaked. Third, no training programs for competitors. If someone wants to learn my techniques, they work exclusively for us for a minimum of 5 years. Fourth, I want funding for a community outreach program through my church, teaching culinary skills to at-risk youth. I stood, and finally Chantel faces full prosecution. No plea deals, no quiet settlements. She committed fraud, and fraud has consequences. The board exchanged glances. Those terms are quite aggressive, one of them said. So was allowing someone to steal my life's work while you sat in meetings questioning my credibility, I replied. Take it or leave it. You have 24 hours to decide. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and gentlemen, the next time you consider betraying someone who's been loyal to you, remember this moment. Remember how much it cost you to learn the difference between an innovator and a thief. Marvin called that evening. We accept your terms. I felt no satisfaction, only resolve. Good. Chantal's public confession happens tomorrow. Or I walk away and you can explain to your investors why you're letting pride cost them everything they have left. When I returned to Jubilee the following week, the atmosphere was different. The staff who had distanced themselves now approached cautiously, aware of every moment they'd chosen self-preservation over loyalty. I didn't fire anyone immediately, but I made it clear that trust, once broken, had to be earned back. Excellence isn't just about knife skills, I told them during our first meeting. It's about character. Some of you forgot that when it mattered most. The real change came when I hired my new leadership team, chefs who had supported me during the crisis, who understood that integrity wasn't negotiable. We rebuilt the culture from the ground up, creating an environment where talent was valued, but character was paramount. Chantal was arrested a week later on fraud charges. She received 18 months in federal prison and was ordered to make full restitution to the investors. I felt no joy in her downfall, but I felt justice. The community outreach program launched a month later, with Pastor Clock helping me identify teenagers who needed direction, purpose, and skills. Teaching them wasn't just about cooking. It was about showing them that success built on lies always crumbles, but success built on truth endures. When a reporter asked me if I felt vindicated, I thought carefully before answering. I feel grateful, I said, grateful that truth always surfaces, that justice still matters, and that sometimes losing everything teaches you what's truly valuable. But vindication? That belongs to God, not me. 6 months later, Pastor Clock asked me to speak at a recovery meeting about second chances. As I ladled soup into containers, I thought about what I would say. The funny thing about cooking, I told the group that night, is that the best dishes often come from the most humble ingredients. You take something broken, day-old bread, wilted vegetables, tough cuts of meat, and with patience and care, you transform them into something beautiful and nourishing. I looked around the room at faces marked by addiction, loss, and failure. I used to think success meant having my name on restaurant signs and awards on my wall. But I learned that real success is about transformation, not just in the kitchen, but in the heart. An older man raised his hand. What changed for you? What made the difference? I thought about that night in my empty apartment when I'd whispered my first real prayer in years, about the support group that had held my brokenness without judgment, about all the small moments of grace that had led me here. I met someone who had been waiting for me my whole life, I said. Someone who saw me not as the successful chef or the failed entrepreneur, but as his daughter. Someone who had already paid the price for every mistake I'd ever made, who offered me a recipe for living that I'd never learned in any culinary school. The room was quiet. His name is Jesus, I continued, and he taught me that the greatest feast isn't about what you can achieve, but about who you can serve. That the master chef isn't the one who creates the most elaborate dishes, but the one who washes the feet of his guests. That night, 3 people asked me to pray with them. As I held their hands and spoke words of faith that felt more natural than any recipe I'd ever memorized, I understood something profound. God hadn't allowed my career to be stolen to punish me, but to redirect me towards something infinitely more satisfying. The following Sunday, I walked into St. Catherine's Church for the first time in 15 years. Pastor Clock smiled as I took a seat in the back row. The hymns felt familiar, like recipes I'd learned in childhood and forgotten until the right moment brought them back. When the invitation was given, I walked forward, my chef's clogs echoing in the sanctuary. I knelt at the altar where my grandmother had prayed for me so many years ago, and I finally offered my whole self, not just my pain, but my gifts, my dreams, my future, to the one who had been preparing a place for me all along. Thank you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face, for not giving up on me, for meeting me in my valley, for showing me that the most important recipe isn't about food at all, it's about love. When I opened my eyes, Sabrina was kneeling beside me, her hand in mine. Welcome home, Mom, she whispered. This story is dedicated to everyone who has ever had their dreams stolen, their trust betrayed, or their identity shattered, and to the master chef who specializes in creating something beautiful from broken ingredients.